Hey guys, what's up? This is Diego here at Cinemageddon Reviews. Sorry for the radio silence on my end. I was working on this video and the next video I'm going to do kind of at the same time, and with my busy schedule it took a lot longer than I wanted. Anyway, here I am, and today I'm giving you guys another analysis video. This time it's not for a movie or TV show, and it's not an ironic analysis either. We're covering our first video game of the series, and what better video game to analyze than The Last of Us. Now, for those of you who have been subscribed since the earliest days of this channel, you know I've already done a review on The Last of Us, but today I'm specifically talking about the most recent remake of the game entitled The Last of Us Part 1. And my goal with this video is to not only cover some of the new and improved aspects of the game, but also to dive into the story and characters even deeper than I did before, because to be honest, my old review hasn't aged that well. I also figured that this year marks the 10th anniversary of the game, and the new HBO series is fantastic, so this would be the perfect time to dust off an old favorite and talk about it again for old time's sake. There will be a few comparisons to the show here and there, but for the most part we're talking about the game, and particularly the main story. And just like all my analysis videos, this is going to contain heavy spoilers. If you haven't played the game or watched the show, this is your chance now to turn this video off so you don't get spoiled on either one. Alright, now that we have that out of the way, here we go. So I'd like to start this review off by posing a question to you. This is an ethical dilemma invented in the 1960s called the trolley problem. It goes like this. You're on an out-of-control trolley headed straight towards a fork in its tracks, and there's no way to stop it. In one direction there are 5 people, and in the other, just 1. One way or another, this trolley is going to kill someone. Now you could do nothing, and the trolley will continue along its track and trample 5 people to death. Or you could pull the lever, make the trolley switch directions, and it will only kill the 1 person. What do you do? Let's make the problem more challenging, shall we? Let's imagine the single person on one side of the tracks is your childhood best friend, someone you've spent your whole life with and you love like a sibling. Let's also imagine that the other track has 5 strangers on it, and though you may not know them, they're also someone's friend, or lover, or parent, or sibling. And the loss of any one of them could be devastating for their loved ones. What do you do now? But hold on a second, let's ask the same question in a different context. Let's pretend you're a surgeon with 6 people on operating tables. 5 of these people are going to die, unless you harvest organs from the 6th person to save them. Just like the trolley problem, this is a case of whether to let 5 people die to save 1, or kill 1 person to save 5. What do you do? Now think about that while we continue with the video. The Last of Us Part 1 is the story of Joel, a man who goes on a cross-country journey with a young girl named Ellie. Over the past 20 years, humanity has been pushed to the brink of extinction by a widespread fungal infection called cordyceps. It's a horrifying infection that takes control of the victims' nervous systems, transforming them into zombie-like creatures and causing them to go on murderous rampages and attack as many people as possible, spreading the infection to everyone it can. What makes Ellie so important is that she's immune to cordyceps, and Joel is tasked with bringing Ellie across the country to the stronghold of a militia group known as the Fireflies, who believe Ellie's immunity is the key to finding a vaccine. As the story goes on, Ellie and Joel work together to get to the Fireflies, forming a bond that many video game fans agree is one of the most compelling in gaming history. This is supported by both the well-written characters and the excellent acting by Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson. At the beginning of the game, we watch as Joel loses his only daughter Sarah, not by infection from cordyceps, but at the hands of the military, indicating that while the cordyceps destroys the civilized world, what's left of humanity destroys itself. For that reason, Joel loses much of his sense of empathy towards others, becoming emotionally closed off and more willing to commit terrible acts of violence against other people to survive. This is what makes Joel the perfect person to escort Ellie to the Fireflies. He will do whatever it takes to protect her. One thing that Joel didn't expect, however, was to go on an emotional journey, where he finds a reason not just to survive, but to live. His bond with Ellie heals his wounds, and gives him a sense of family that he hasn't felt in many years. At the end of the game, he will face the ultimate choice: to save the world, or save the 1 person in this world who makes him human. The Last of Us was initially released in 2013 and was created by Neil Druckmann of Naughty Dog Games. This is a survival horror adventure game that's about 15 hours in length for the main story, and a DLC called Left Behind that's about 2 hours in length. There's also a factions multiplayer mode that many people enjoy, though for the Part 1 remake they didn't include. Now, the game gives the player use of improvised weapons, limited ammo, and stealth tactics to survive in the post-apocalyptic world of the story. Throughout the game, you can gather supplies and craft things like explosives and health kits to keep you alive and protected against enemies, both human and infected. One of the best aspects of the gameplay has always been the intensity of it. You can feel every gunshot, every punch, every explosion. The graphics and the sound make the gameplay immersive and addictive. Combat sequences feel thrilling and challenging, with different types of enemies and different strategies to use for each. Easier enemies like runners and hunters can be taken out with just your hands, whereas clickers and bloaters require keeping your distance or using a stealthy approach. Weapons can be upgraded at workbenches with enough parts gathered from the world, and stats can be upgraded with enough pills. You can be tougher and better prepared for the dangers ahead. This new version of the game, The Last of Us Part 1, lets you experience a much more detailed and refined version of Neil Druckmann's vision. The developers behind this remake have enhanced and highlighted a lot of aspects older versions of this game didn't touch on as well. It's not just the graphics and certain animations, but also parts of the gameplay like new combat mechanics and completely rebuilt and more dynamic environments that make this feel much more like a remake than a simple reskin. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that the clickers and bloaters are much more difficult to beat than in the remastered version. They move differently, they seem more sensitive to noise, and fighting these guys in dark areas where the blacks are deeper and the sound is more dynamic is a lot scarier. The haptic system on the PS5 adds a deeper layer of immersion, making the combat and kills more satisfying. Even simple things like smashing a window or holding an enemy at gunpoint feel more intense thanks to the game's new and improved use of vibration. Additionally, there are new accessibility options like colorblind modes, audio descriptions for the in-game cinematics, even single-hand control options. It's fantastic. There are 2 new game modes in this one. The first is speedrun mode for you hardcore gamers trying to challenge each other, and something I'm looking forward to trying in the future is permadeath mode. It's something that I've never had the chance to do with The Last of Us, and I'm glad this new remake implemented that. There are even some additional skins for Joel and Ellie to unlock if you rack up enough points. It's good incentive to replay the game, and it's a neat little aesthetic for us to appreciate with each new playthrough. Neil Druckmann describes this as the definitive way to play The Last of Us, and personally I'm inclined to agree that The Last of Us Part 1 is an improvement on the original version, in more ways than one. To show you how impactful the journey Joel goes on is, let's first establish the world the characters live in. 20 years after the outbreak, Joel is a smuggler living in the military-controlled quarantine zone in Boston. The world outside has been ravaged by the infection, and he and his partner Tess engage in black market trading behind the backs of the totalitarian government forces of Fedra. Outside the surviving quarantine zones, factions of hunters have formed in different spots around the country, where the members of these groups engage in much more horrific methods of survival, which we'll explore later. That doesn't mean this world doesn't have room for second chances. In Jackson, Wyoming, Joel's brother Tommy has helped build a thriving community and give people hope for a good future, one where people don't have to choose to sacrifice their humanity for survival. But these communities are a rare exception to the harsh reality of the rest of the world, and almost everywhere else people are fighting to reclaim this way of life. The freedom fighter group known as the Fireflies are engaged in a full-on war against Fedra, and their attempts to free Boston and re-establish a democratic government are failing. Later in the game, we get the sense that they've failed in other places too, and because of this, morale among the Firefly ranks, as well as recruitment of new members, is declining. One of my favorite things about The Last of Us is just how grounded in reality everything is, from the gameplay to the graphics to the science behind how everything works. I mean, not the part where you can light a Molotov cocktail and put it back in your pocket without setting yourself on fire. That part doesn't make sense. I'm specifically talking about the cordyceps infection. This is a real fungus that exists in the world today, except currently it only affects small insects. Did you know that the fungus keeps its host alive and conscious for as long as possible while it takes control of their body and feeds on its flesh? That's probably the scariest part of the whole game, the knowledge that the people inside these runners and stalkers are alive and fully aware of their surroundings and actions, yet unable to stop themselves from attacking other people. So the reason I'm telling you all this is to establish the context of the world and how it plays into the theme of The Last of Us, that in this post-apocalyptic world there are no good people, there are simply people willing to do terrible things to survive. There may be a lucky few thriving today, but it came at great cost of who they once were. Now after a deadly conflict on the streets of the Boston QZ, the Fireflies are nearly wiped out, and their leader Marlene is seriously wounded. Because of Marlene's condition, Joel and Tess are tasked with escorting Ellie, a girl they know little about, to a Firefly rendezvous point just outside the Boston QZ. They quickly discover that Ellie is immune when Ellie's forced to show them her bite. The strange thing is, where normally people turn savage within 2 days, Ellie's bite is 3 weeks old. Soon after, while making their way through downtown Boston, Tess is bitten by a runner, and the infection begins to spread quickly, showing Joel that Ellie's immunity is in fact real. Ultimately, the Fireflies are found to have been wiped out by Fedra shortly before they get there, and Tess sacrifices herself to buy Joel and Ellie more time to escape and find out where the rest of them went. This brings up a grim statement the game's creator Neil Druckmann repeats throughout the story via its subtext, that in a world so grim and that takes so much so quickly, people will do anything to hold on to as much hope as they can.
I think we could use some good old pun humor. I tried to catch some fog earlier. I missed.
Ellie's part in the story is radically unique from other companions in video games, and in my opinion makes her the most fascinating character in the game. What makes her so compelling is, she's not just an emotional anchor and a contrast to the stoic, emotionally unavailable Joel. She also shares something in common with Joel in her traumatic past. Like Joel, Ellie once had someone she cared about, that being her best friend Riley. When she and Riley were attacked by infected and subsequently bitten, Riley turned while Ellie stayed human. Ellie has had survivor's guilt ever since, which certainly led to her decision to help the Fireflies find a cure, because she feels this could bring her closure for Riley's death. Every time Ellie witnesses someone die from cordyceps, that survivor's guilt gets worse. The urgency of her journey is shown to her many times when she travels across the country and sees the impact that cordyceps has had on the world. Not just the part it's played in wiping out humanity, but how the mere threat of the fungus has made people turn on each other.
Your fellow hunters do this?
Cute. And no, my money's on the military.
Why would they mow down all these people?
You can't let everyone in.
And yet, unlike Joel, all this violence, all this darkness, is what motivates Ellie to search for a new meaning. Where Joel resigns himself to loneliness, Ellie refuses to believe that hope is futile.
After all we've been through. Everything that I've done. It can't be for nothing.
The TV show expands on this further, taking its time through dialogue and subtext between Joel and Ellie to illustrate how that pain has changed her, and keeps her motivated to accomplish her goal, and conversely, how this change in Ellie changes Joel. Joel initially sees this hope that Ellie holds onto as simple naivety, because how could a child, who has little experience outside of QZ, possibly understand how this harsh world works? But over the course of this journey, he learns more and more about Ellie. He's reminded that he once had someone like her, who he cared about more than anyone else, and against his better judgment, he starts to see her as his own daughter, to the point where he becomes afraid. Halfway through the story, Joel realizes what Ellie is becoming to him, and is initially afraid of what he's feeling, to the point where he's willing to completely abandon his mission.
I'm sorry about your daughter, Joel, but I have lost people too.
You have no idea what loss is.
Everyone I have cared for has either died or left me. Everyone fucking except for you. So don't tell me that I would be safer with someone else, because the truth is I would just be more scared.
You're right. You're not my daughter. And I sure as hell ain't your dad.
But he realizes that this fear of his own feelings is actually a fear of reliving grief by losing her. This is something that the TV show depicts differently, but in my opinion just as well as in the game. Different people have different ways of grieving. Some retreat into themselves. Some seek to project their failures onto other people. Some even shoulder too much responsibility and attempt to help others at their own expense, as a sort of masochistic coping mechanism. But all that changes when you find the right reasons to keep going, to not just live, but thrive. At the end of their journey, Ellie and Joel reach two different versions of the same conclusion, and Joel puts it best right here.
No matter what, you keep finding something to fight for.
And just like Ellie sees her value in finding a cure, Joel sees his value in keeping Ellie safe. And perhaps he even sees a chance at redemption for the horrible things he's done. Maybe he sees that just like his brother Tommy, if he holds on to this and doesn't let go, his future can be just a little bit brighter.
Look, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. A partner. Somebody I had to look after. And in this world, that sort of shit's good for one thing: getting you killed.
As I've already said multiple times, the world of The Last of Us is harsh and filled with loss. Joel and Ellie experience their fair share of pain, not just in the past, but in the present. And the game uses death as a subtle reminder of the changes Joel and Ellie must make within themselves to survive. When Joel loses Tess, it's a reminder that Joel is always searching for someone to care for, even when he least expects it. Tess's death is more devastating than Joel initially shows, and what frustrates Joel about it is that even though he doesn't allow it, it's pain that covers familiar territory, and reminds him of the reason why he doesn't want to escort Ellie to the Fireflies. He scolds Ellie for bringing up Tess, because to him this just adds insult to injury. But it's not just Joel and Ellie who experience loss. The game also shows us how other characters deal with this type of trauma. Later in the story, we meet Bill, who has already experienced the loss of his partner Frank, and like Joel has retreated into himself, becoming fiercely protective of his own feelings to prevent from admitting his own pain. Perhaps the dramatic irony of Bill and Joel's interactions is that Bill is exactly how Joel is at the start of his journey, and when these two don't get along, it's indicative that even Joel doesn't like who he has become. It's actually one of the most clever relationships in the game. That's not to say that the show didn't also treat Bill as a tool to educate Joel. In fact, they did, just in a different way. Where Bill in the game was a cautionary tale, Bill on the show was a more positive lesson, showing the benefits of letting yourself be vulnerable to others. Next we have Henry and Sam. These two characters, both on the show and in the game, are essentially a mirror version of Joel and Ellie, two people who depend on each other to survive. Henry and Sam are all each of them have left in the world, and they care about each other very much. Joel even sees much of himself in Henry. As Ellie and Sam bond with each other, it becomes clear what each of them is fighting for, and that their alliance could let them thrive. But all that is cut short when Sam becomes an infected, and that loss proves too much for Henry to handle.
I'm gonna get that gun from you, okay? Oh, okay, easy.
It's your fault.
This is nobody's fault, Henry.
It's all your fault.
Henry! Henry, no!
Sam's death and Henry's suicide are a grim indicator of the impact that losing Ellie could have on Joel, as well as a sobering reminder of what Ellie is fighting for. Later in the game, we meet Tommy, and we see that after a life full of indecision and failed attempts to be a hero, he's finally found a place where he can make a difference. He's married, and helping the Jackson community thrive, to some great results. Joel believes that since Tommy has become much more successful than Joel, that Ellie should go with him to the Fireflies instead. That's what he initially thinks. It's not until Joel's outburst at the ranch house that he realizes just how much Ellie means to him, and he makes the conscious choice to let her be a part of his life. Perhaps Joel has finally learned his lesson. Next, there's David. Ellie meets David in the wintertime, and with his help, wards off an entire horde of infected. But David has been on the hunt for Joel, ever since Joel killed many of his men, and because of this, he sends men after Ellie to kidnap her. Later, we find out that David's group are cannibals, who have also killed tons of people. Up until this point, we have encountered nothing but helpful allies, but David is the story's way of letting us know that this won't be the case for everyone you meet in the apocalypse. One other subtle thing the game does during this section is illustrate how much Ellie has changed since the story began. Ellie has to take care of the injured Joel, keeping him warm, properly medicated, and fed all by herself. On her own, she escapes the clutches of David and his cannibalistic group, and even gruesomely murders David with his own machete. This event traumatizes Ellie, but also gives her the strength to do what it takes to stay alive and protect those she loves. Or does it turn her into something darker? Perhaps that's a conversation for another video. At the end of the story, Joel and Ellie reach St. Mary's Hospital, against all odds and after nearly drowning in a flooded underground tunnel. They are rescued by the Fireflies, and the unconscious Ellie is taken in for initial tests by the doctors. Joel is told by Marlene that the only way the Fireflies can figure out how Ellie's immunity works is by removing the cordyceps from her body and studying it. The only problem is, because the infection grows all over the victim's brain, the procedure would kill Ellie. Joel obviously disagrees with this because of how much he has grown to care about Ellie, so he fights his way through the hospital, killing dozens of Fireflies and even the head surgeon. Then, he carries the still unconscious Ellie out of the hospital, and to ensure no Fireflies come searching for Ellie in the future, kills Marlene. When Ellie wakes up, she and Joel are well on their way back to Jackson. Joel tells Ellie the Fireflies have stopped looking for a cure. He tells her dozens of immune people just like her have turned up, and were unable to help. At the end of the game, Ellie's survivor's guilt is heavier than ever, and Joel lies to her once again, swearing that everything he told her is true. The game presents us with that classic moral dilemma, that being the trolley problem, and the cliffhanger leaves the player to debate whether or not Joel made the right choice by saving Ellie. Personally speaking, I can easily see that Joel's morality is biased. He's not a completely honest person, and he would certainly put his own interest before anyone else. He didn't just save Ellie because he cared about her, he saved her to spare himself from the pain of losing his daughter once again. Enduring that kind of pain twice is something people seldom recover from, and I can't say I wouldn't do the same if I were in Joel's shoes. That being said, from an objective point of view, I'm still on Joel's side. Now, first of all, I don't think Joel should have lied to Ellie. I totally get why he did, though. It's because Ellie would have agreed to dying in the hospital, and Joel knew that. But I think in order to help her come to terms with it, he should have come clean about it. She would have been pissed, but ultimately Ellie would have understood why he did it. In fact, Joel lying to Ellie would probably hurt Ellie more than if he had told her the truth. From the moment the Fireflies discovered Ellie, she has been convinced that the only value she has is in her immunity from cordyceps, to the point where she shoulders the guilt from every person who dies from it. And if we've learned anything about Joel, we know that is simply not true. Ellie's core flaw is her survivor's guilt, which I think is the main reason she would have agreed to dying in the hospital. Given time and perspective, this guilt can change into a more positive self-image. Furthermore, if Ellie had known the truth from the start, she would have changed her mind about her decision after some time. She may have come to realize that Joel saved her because she has value outside of her immunity, but we'll never know that for sure because Joel had to make that choice for her, and he also lied to her. Now that we've covered that, let's talk about the Fireflies themselves. They mean well, but the fact is, they're incompetent, and not trustworthy. Their motivations may be admirable, but their desperation makes them dangerous. First of all, if the Fireflies had been capable of making a vaccine for cordyceps, they would know it would actually require keeping Ellie alive to study the response her body has developed for counteracting the infection. Not extracting the growth and killing the only known immune host, but studying how the body protects itself from it. Killing Ellie was merely a last resort to figure that out, and quite frankly, a colossal mistake that indicates the Fireflies didn't have the first clue how to make a vaccine in the first place.
The cause of her immunity is uncertain. As we've seen in all past cases, the antigenic titers of the patient's cordyceps remain high in both the serum and the cerebrospinal fluid. Blood cultures taken from the patient rapidly grow cordyceps and fungal media in the lab. However, white blood cell lines, including percentages and absolute counts, are completely normal. There is no elevation of pro-inflammatory cytokines, and an MRI of the brain shows no evidence of fungal growth in the limbic regions, which would normally accompany the prodrome of aggression in infected patients. We must find a way to replicate this state under laboratory conditions.
Secondly, we know the Fireflies have had very little success in maintaining a foothold in any QZ across the country. We know that they're scared of being wiped out, and judging by their morale, they're close to disbanding anyway, as Marlene documented in her journal. This is largely due to their multiple failed attempts to either grow their numbers or take control of the QZs, including making a vaccine. Which explains why they didn't ask Ellie for her consent for the procedure. If she had said no, the Fireflies would have no other strategies left. And for the record, she would have said yes, which just goes to show their warped morality. Finally, I'd like to think that Marlene wants to be a good person, and there are plenty of good reasons to believe she cares about Ellie. But she, like the Firefly movement, was desperate. Desperate enough to turn to a couple of random smugglers to take care of her most valuable asset when her back was against the wall. In fact, she all but spells out she would have never trusted Joel and Tess under normal circumstances.
Holy shit. Is that your people? What's left of them? Why do you think I'm turning to you guys?
And when the option is presented for her to spare or kill Ellie, she's so desperate to keep the Fireflies going, so determined to keep her freedom fighter movement alive just a little longer, that she's willing to sacrifice her surrogate daughter to do it, without so much as giving her a choice in the matter. And in doing so, she would also sacrifice a symbol of the entire reason she's fighting in the first place, not just the eradication of cordyceps, but giving people the freedom to choose. It's why the Fireflies are fighting Fedra in the first place. Which leads me to believe that even if they managed to make a vaccine, the Fireflies, and especially Marlene, were already on their way to becoming a corrupt regime, with no regard for anyone but their own. Never mind the fact that the Fireflies used up all of Joel's equipment that he was meant to be paid back with. Never mind the fact that they planned to kill him before Marlene intervened. Never mind that even after Marlene intervened, they were going to send Joel out into the wild without any of his weapons to defend himself. The Fireflies were incapable, had all but lost their integrity, and were not to be trusted. However, you can't deny the morality of Joel's choice is clearly selfish. Even if I personally agree with it from an outsider's perspective, and I would have done the same thing, it doesn't change how it revealed who Joel is. Joel is a murderer, willing to do the worst possible things to survive. But Joel is also a father who has lost a child before and is not willing to go through that heartache again, and he'll do whatever it takes to protect the person he loves most, even if it means killing thousands of people with his bare hands.
Swear to me that everything that you've said about the Fireflies is true.
I swear.
Okay.
And this is the message of The Last of Us, that in a world so unfair, so harsh and filled with loss, there are no good guys. There are simply people just trying to survive. So what is the meaning of the trolley problem? Have you thought about your answer? Because I have some news for you. The trolley problem is an experiment, and if you chose an answer, no matter which one it is, you failed. The trolley problem was never about finding a solution. It was about illustrating what ethics people agree or disagree on. In the case of The Last of Us, it was about asking two questions. How many human lives are worth sacrificing before you start to question your own morals? And just how much is a single person's life worth to you? If you didn't choose, congratulations, you're a good person. I mean, as far as the apocalypse is concerned, you're probably dead, but you died a moral person, so there's that. Overall, guys, The Last of Us is a timeless classic about love, loss, and the core of what makes us human. It has gripping performances, intense and fun action, a fascinating lore, and probably one of the most compelling stories ever told in a video game. It also has the best live-action adaptation out of any video game to date, and I can't wait for the show's second season. The Last of Us Part 1 is also a great remake of the game with a ton of cool new features and things to discover. As I write this, the full price of The Last of Us Part 1 is $69.99, which if you already own an older version of the game is pretty steep, and in your case I would wait for a sale. But it's still an experience worth checking out because I had a great time with it. However, if this is your first time purchasing the game, the price is well worth it. You wouldn't just be getting a great game, you'd be getting a great story. And with that said, my rating for The Last of Us Part 1 is of course 10 out of 10. So if you played The Last of Us Part 1, what are your thoughts? Do you enjoy it? Do you enjoy the TV show? And what are some of your favorite moments from either one? Let me know in the comments. Also, heads up you guys, my next video will be a review of The Last of Us Part 2. It's not going to be an analysis video, but I'm still looking forward to sharing my thoughts on that game as well, so stay tuned for that. As always, be sure to like this video and subscribe, follow us on all our social medias, and please support our Patreon so you can get the chance to request a movie or show you'd like to see us talk about next. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Diego for Cinemageddon Reviews, and I'll see you on the Wasteland.